scholars, and happy Tuesday! I hope you had an amazing Memorial Day. I did. I had a day to relax and enjoy my day off from school, but I am well rested and ready for an amazing week to continue all of my learning, and I know you are too. I cannot wait for us to see what we're going to be studying about this week. Last week we started doing fairy tales and fables, and we read a whole entire week on the Three Little Pigs. This week we're going to do something similar, but with a different story. I wonder what the story might be. Do you have any guesses? Well, let's go find out. Let's go. Okay, scholars, let's see what we're going to be studying this week. It's fairy tales and fables again. Before we do anything with fairy tales and fables, let's remember the characteristics of a fairy tale. Remember them from last week when we did the Three Little Pigs? Let's do them together. Usually begins with once upon a time. There's good and evil characters. They always have a happy ending. At the end of the books, it might say they lived happily ever after, or they were very happy together at the end. Then they have the rule of three. And then the very last one is there's usually a problem that needs a solution. So there's a problem, and in the story they have to figure out how to fix the problem to have a good solution at the end that makes them live happily ever after. So those are the characteristics of a fairy tale that we will be looking for in every book we read this week. Before anything, I want us to go do our fairy tale chant. Do you remember our fairy tale chant that we did together? If you didn't, that's okay, because we're going to go watch a video and practice our fairy tale chants again. Let's go do it. Okay, scholars, we're going to learn a special chant that we can use to help us remember some of the characteristics of a fairy tale. Fairy tale chant, get ready, go. Fairy tales are stories that start with once upon a time and have good and evil characters and have a happy ending. Let's continue and look at some of the feeling words that we're going to feel in today's story. Awesome job remembering the fairy tale chant with the good and evil characters. You did so good. Love it, scholars. Now let's go look at some of the feeling words we're going to see in today's story. Today, we're going to see somebody feeling discouraged. What does it mean, scholars, to feel discouraged? Yeah, I see in the picture there's a boy on a bike and maybe he fell off and he looks really sad. He has a frown on his face. The card says, when you don't believe that you can do something, you're discouraged. Maybe he fell off his bike and he doesn't want to try to ride his bike again because he's discouraged and doesn't think he can do it anymore. I have it in a sentence as well. I was discouraged when I failed at making a cake and I did not want to try again. So I tried being a baker and it didn't go so well. And I was discouraged and I didn't want to try again because the first one was so bad. Yeah, that's being discouraged. So in our story today, one of our characters is going to feel discouraged at least one part of the story. You ready to see what our story is? I am. Our story and our focus story for the whole entire week is going to be Cinderella. So every single day this week, we're going to read a different version of Cinderella. Just like last week, we read different versions of the Three Little Pigs. Well, this week we're doing different versions of Cinderella. Today we're going to do the original Disney version of Cinderella, which is one of my favorites. In our story, Cinderella, I want you to think about three things. First, what happens at the beginning, middle, and end. What happens at the beginning, middle, and end of the story. Next, when was Cinderella discouraged in the story? And why? What discouraged her? And lastly, of course, I want you to be looking for the characteristics of a fairy tale. I know that you're easily going to be able to spot at least three of them. I will see you in a few minutes when we are done enjoying the story, Cinderella. Cinderella. Adapted by Thea Feldman. illustrated by the Disney storybook artists. Once upon a time, in a faraway land, a beautiful girl named Cinderella lived with her devoted father. Cinderella's mother had passed away years before, and her father decided she needed a new mother. He married again, giving Cinderella a stepmother and 2 stepsisters. When Cinderella's father suddenly passed away, she was heartbroken. The poor girl quickly discovered that her stepmother, Lady Tremaine, was cold, cruel, and bitterly jealous of Cinderella's charm and beauty. Her stepsisters, Anastasia and Drizella, were equally cruel. As years passed, Cinderella became a servant in her own home. She was forced to live in a tiny room in the attic and had to wait on her stepfamily all day long. Luckily, Cinderella's animal friends kept her company. Though her stepfamily mistreated her, Cinderella believed her dreams would come true someday. She remained kind and gentle, even sewing little clothes for her mice friends and making sure they were safe and fed. 2 of the mice, Jack and Gus, became Cinderella's best friends. One morning, poor Gus was almost caught by stepmother's mean old cat Lucifer. Luckily, Gus managed to slip away and hide under a teacup on the breakfast tray. Just as Lucifer was about to discover Gus's hiding place, a bell rang. That meant Lady Tremaine and her daughters wanted their breakfast. Balancing the trays, Cinderella hurried up the stairs, unaware that she was carrying a little stowaway under one of the teacups. Shortly after breakfast was served, Cinderella heard screams. Anastasia found Gus under her cup. She accused Cinderella of serving her a mouse on purpose. Cinderella was immediately summoned back to Lady Tremaine's room. As punishment, her stepmother said, you will wash the windows, scrub the terrace, and sweep the halls. Meanwhile, in another part of the kingdom, the king was complaining to the Grand Duke. It's time the prince got married, he declared. The king decided to invite every eligible maiden to the royal ball so his son could find his bride. Later that morning, Cinderella stopped doing her chores to answer a knock at the door. A messenger from the palace handed her an invitation to the ball that evening. Lady Tremaine snatched the invitation and read it aloud. Her daughters squealed with excitement. When Cinderella asked if she could attend the ball too, Lady Tremaine reluctantly agreed. But only if you get all of your work done, and only if you have something suitable to wear, she said with a nasty sneer. In the attic, Cinderella found a dress that had once belonged to her mother. It was a bit old-fashioned, but Cinderella was sure she could fix it. Just as she was about to start sewing, her stepfamily called for her. There were many more chores to do. Cinderella sadly left the room, and her animal friends got right to work. The clever animals found an old sash and some beads. They stitched the ornaments in place and turned the simple dress into a fabulous gown. Cinderella was thrilled and so grateful. Now she can go to the ball. When Anastasia and Drizella saw how pretty Cinderella looked, they flew into a jealous rage. The stepsisters ripped the dress and pulled off the sash and yanked off the beads. Lady Tremaine simply stood and watched. With no hope of going to the ball and meeting the prince, Cinderella ran into the garden and sobbed. Scholars, why is Cinderella discouraged right now in the story? As she kneeled there, twinkling lights filled the air. Then a woman appeared. It was Cinderella's fairy godmother. The fairy godmother told Cinderella that there was still time to attend the royal ball. With a wave of her magic wand, she transformed a simple pumpkin into an elegant coach and the mice into horses. Then the fairy godmother pointed her magic wand at Cinderella and said, "Bippity-boppity-boo." Suddenly, Cinderella was wearing a stunning gown. On her feet were sparkling glass slippers. Cinderella was off to the ball. The fairy godmother warned her to be home by midnight, when the spell would wear off. At the ball, the prince was introduced to the eligible maidens in the kingdom. Anastasia and Drizella curtsied to him, but someone else caught the prince's eye. The prince hurried over to the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. He and Cinderella danced all night without even introducing themselves. Cinderella had no idea she was dancing with the prince. She was having the most wonderful night of her life. And then the clock began to chime midnight. Cinderella had forgotten about the time. She ran down the palace steps, losing a glass slipper along the way. "Wait! I don't know your name!" the prince called. The Grand Duke rushed after Cinderella, but she didn't stop. Cinderella and her friends made it through the palace gates before the spell wore off and everything turned back to normal. Her beautiful dress was gone, but thanks to her fairy godmother, Cinderella still had the memories of an incredible evening and one glass slipper. Back at the palace, the king was furious that the girl his son wanted to marry had vanished. He ordered the Grand Duke to find her. Word spread that the prince was searching for the girl who had lost a glass slipper. Lady Tremaine suspected it was Cinderella, but didn't know for certain. She didn't want Cinderella to have a chance to try on a shoe. She locked the poor girl in her room just before the Grand Duke arrived. The Grand Duke explained that every maiden in the kingdom was to try on the slipper. The girl who fit the slipper perfectly would marry the prince. While Anastasia and Drizella tried to squeeze their big feet into the dainty slipper, Jacques and Gus stole the key to Cinderella's room from Lady Tremaine's pocket and unlocked the door. Cinderella rushed down just as the Grand Duke was preparing to leave. Lady Tremaine could not allow Cinderella to try on the shoe. She tripped the footman, causing the glass slipper to fall and shatter. But Cinderella surprised them all. She had the other slipper in her pocket, and of course, it was a perfect fit. Cinderella and the prince were soon married, to the delight of the king, but no one was happier than Cinderella, whose dreams had come true at last. The end. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed hearing the story of Cinderella. Did you like it? It's one of my absolute favorite stories by Disney. I love Cinderella. Did you pick up on some of the elements of a fairy tale or the characteristics? Yeah, it had the once upon a time, and of course it had the happily ever after at the very end, so they had a great ending that was happy. Anything else? You're absolutely right. There was a big problem in our story, and she had to be able to solve the problem. What was the problem that happened in the story? Yeah, she wasn't able to go to the ball. Her dress was destroyed, and she could not go. And then the solution to the problem was the fairy godmother came and gave her a beautiful gown, and it allowed her to be able to go to the ball. So her problem was solved because of the fairy godmother's help. Remember, before we began this story, I asked you to think about what happens in the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story. So let's go over that together so we are nice and refreshed about it. In the beginning, her father married her stepmother, and she had two stepsisters, and she learned that they were an evil stepmother and two really cruel and rude evil stepsisters. And then she was invited to go to a ball. So that's all what happened at the beginning. What happened in the middle was she made her dress for the ball, but then it was destroyed and she couldn't go. Then what happened? Her fairy godmother came and she was able to go to the ball. This story isn't just a beginning, middle, and end. There's a lot of elements to this story. So we know at the beginning we were introduced to the characters. And then we knew the problem of her dress being destroyed. But then at the end, it wasn't just that she got to go to the ball, was it? There's more information. So after she went to the ball and then the clock struck midnight, then what happened? Yeah, the story wasn't over. She left her glass slipper. And then the prince wanted to find the woman who fit into the glass slipper. Did he find that? Yeah, it was Cinderella. What was the feeling word I wanted you to look for Cinderella? Yeah, it was discouraged. When was she discouraged in the story? Yeah, she was discouraged when her evil stepsisters ripped apart her dress. She did not think she was going to be able to go to the ball. She was very discouraged about that. She was seen crying in the garden before the fairy godmother arrived because she was so discouraged. Good job picking that out, scholars. Well, this was the first book out of a whole week of us studying different versions of Cinderella. I hope you enjoyed the first Cinderella story of the week. Before you go, I want you to click the link below and fill out a couple questions. First, I want you to fill out what happens in the beginning, the middle, and the end. take time to read the 3 options and think about which one of those 3 options happened in the beginning, which one happened in the middle, and which one happened at the end. I do not want you just to guess and go 1, 2, 3, because that's not always the answer. You actually have to read the choices to figure out which one is first, which one is second, and which one is third or last. So make sure you're reading them, because when I see the responses, I can see some people are just going 1, 2, 3 and calling it a day. And I know that you did not read them to actually figure out which one happened first, second, or third. So take some time when you fill out the link below and really think of which one was first, second, and third. I cannot wait to see how great you remembered our story. I'll see all of you here tomorrow. Goodbye.